Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Monday Morning. It's Stephen Whiteside here from theuptrend.com. In the pre-market this morning, stock index futures and gold are trading lower, while crude oil is trading slightly higher on Monday morning. Now, we don't have any economic numbers coming out this morning. We will have them later in the week, but this week is all about the Fed. The Fed meeting starts tomorrow, ends on Wednesday afternoon, and that is, of course, when all the fun begins. Now, this presentation is going to include mostly weekly charts. There's a couple of daily charts in here. We use weekly charts to help filter out all that noise from Monday to Friday. And of course, if you consider yourself a long-term investor, you should be focused on the weekly charts much more than any daily charts. Starting off with the VIX, or the Fear Index, it's still on a sell signal here. That's supportive of higher stock prices on a long-term basis. We're going to look for a change this coming Friday if the VIX were to close above 1561. Now, if you're watching the market from Monday to Friday, the VIX is currently on a daily sell signal. That's supportive for higher stock prices on a short-term basis. That would change on Monday if the VIX were to close above 1372. Now, if we just take a quick look at what happened recently, the VIX ran up to the 200-day moving average and came back down. And so next time the VIX wants to run up, it'll be quite significant if we start breaking out above that 200-day moving average. Now, it's important to remember that the market is still very, very focused on a sector and a stock. The semiconductors were the big winners last week, up nearly 5% on the week. That was the best performing sector in North America. And NVIDIA, of course, which might not have been the best performing chip stock, is the biggest company out there. So it has a tremendous weighting in the major indices. Not the Dow, you'll see that in a minute, but the NASDAQ 100 and the S&P 500, which is where all the futures traders are. And so NVIDIA was up over 10% on the week. Now remember, NVIDIA is splitting today. So the numbers we're looking at right now, last week, our daily and weekly target at the top of our projected trading range was 1250 on the daily chart. It is now increased. We do have projections higher than 1250 now. And on the weekly chart, our next projection was 1250, but based on last week's trading action, we expanded that. And so 1375 is both the next daily and weekly target. Now, it's important to remember that we ran up, tagged 1250 last week, and then started to pull back on Thursday and Friday. So this could be a situation where it's buy the rumor, sell the news. Now, the rumor in this case was the fact that it's going to split 10 for 1 today. It split after the close on Friday, and of course that is going to be reflected in today's trading action. So it'll probably be the most actively traded stock again on Monday. There are a lot of people betting against this stock, and so it wouldn't be surprising for it to continue to move lower from here. Now on Monday, we're going to be looking for a close below $110.21 to give us a new daily sell signal for NVIDIA. We're not seeing a lot of volatility in the pre-market on Monday morning. Now, of course, semiconductors were leading. The NASDAQ 100 wasn't too far behind, up 2.72%. Then we had the technology ETF up 2.59%. Then looking at the iShares for the NASDAQ 100 traded on the TSX up 2.58%. And then the biggest winner on the NASDAQ 100 was actually CrowdStrike, up over 10%. Then we had Illumina, which was up over 9% on the week, but not enough to give us a new buy signal. The biggest loser on the NASDAQ 100 was actually Sirius, which was down over 9% on the week, so continuing that trend. And then we saw Constellation Energy down over 8%, nearly 9% on the week. And we saw weakness across the board in commodity stocks, and we'll look at that a bit more closely when we look at the Canadian market. Now, I wanted to mention Apple. Apple's coming up to the previous high, which was $199.62. You can see that twice previously we've been up to this level and failed, and we're going to have to see if we can fail or run through. Obviously, if we fail, that's a triple top, and that would be very bearish for Apple and possibly the technology sector. So we're going to make or break this this week, probably, and we are trading higher in the pre-market this morning. So just be aware, $199.62 was the previous high. and we're looking for resistance at 200. If they can break through resistance, and 200 is a big round number, then 212.50 is our next target for Apple. Now, Canadian technology stocks were also up on the week. They traded up to the lower channel line, so certainly no change in trend there, and no change in trend for Shopify, up over 5% on the week, but still far away from a new weekly buy signal. Now, the Dow was actually up just 0.25% on the week, so no joy there. We're still on a weekly buy signal here, but we're certainly not trending higher. Unlike the S&P 500, which was up 1.26%, if you look at the equal weighted S&P 500, it was actually down 0.75% and trading in the channel. So you take away some of those big cap technology stocks and you can see the rest of the market not doing well. Then looking at the NASDAQ 100, we talked about this earlier. I just want to compare the fact that those 100 stocks were up 2.72%. The equal weighted NASDAQ was only up 1%. The next generation NASDAQ stocks were actually down a little over 0.5% on the week. Then the similar situation for the Russell 2000. It was down over 2% on the week. Then small caps down just under 2%, and then micro caps down over 3% on the week. So once you get away from those big cap tech stocks, especially Nvidia, you can see the rest of the market didn't have a happy week. Then looking at the Canadian market, the iShares for the TSX 60 were down a little over 1%. We traded through the lower channel line, and we did that last week as well, but did not close below it. So a sell signal would be generated this Friday if we were to close below $33.11. Now, the Dow, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ all closed higher on the week while the TSX closed lower. Why is that? Well, it had a lot to do with commodities. Gold ended the week down over $20. It's still on a weekly buy signal. That would change this coming Friday if gold were to close below $2,305.70. We see silver down dramatically as well, still well above the lower channel line, so not expecting a change in trend. Then looking at the TSX Global Gold Index, it was down over 4% on the week. The biggest loser on the TSX 60 for the week was actually Kinross, which was one of the best performers for the last few months, down over 8% on the week. Then crude oil was also hit hard. It was came into the week already on a weekly sell signal. It was down nearly 2% on the week, and that pulled energy stocks down on the TSX. They were down 5.7%. In New York, they were down 3.44%. Some of the biggest losers on the TSX were the energy stocks, including Cenovus. So big down week for Cenovus, back on a weekly sell signal. That's also true for Imperial Oil and then Canadian Natural Resources, and then Suncor, all down sharply on the week. Suncor is still on a weekly buy signal. That would change this coming Friday if it were to close below $51.40. Then looking at financials, a little concerned here. Looking at U.S. financials, they were down a little over 0.33% on the week, still on a weekly buy signal. Banks traded right down to the lower channel line, and we've got regional banks back on a weekly sell signal. Looking at broker dealers, they closed lower, just 0.33%, still at the upper channel line, and then insurance companies were down 1.51%, still on a weekly buy signal, but seeing a lot of weakness in the financial sectors. Looking at the Canadian market, we were down 0.92%, so just under 1% on the week, but down for the third week in a row. Canadian banks were down a little over 1% for the week. The biggest loser was Bank of Montreal, down over nearly 4% on the week, so continuing its slide. And then in the U.S., it was Comerica, which was down over 6% on the week. That was the biggest losing bank stock in the U.S. from last week's trading action. Now, that's all I wanted to cover in this morning's presentation. Again, coming into Monday's trading action, we'll be watching the VIX, and if the VIX were to close above 1372, we would be moving from being short-term bullish on the overall market to being short-term bearish. Again, commodities are mixed in the pre-market, so the gold sector may continue to move lower on Monday as gold prices continue to slide coming into Monday's trading action. That's all I wanted to cover this morning, folks. Have a great day. Next time you'll hear my voice is on Tuesday morning, And at that time, we'll take a look at the most actively traded stocks on both sides of the border.
Thank you for watching today's presentation. If you found this video useful, please consider hitting the like button, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel to ensure you never miss a video. We look forward to having you join us for our next daily market update.